Thank you for nice words, Mr. Berko. Thank you for being here. GraphQL. About me, I'm passionate about software, about writing, which is same thing as software, but for other kinds of computers. Music, but not at the level of Berko. Many programming languages, anything that is interesting interests me. Right now, I'm messing a lot with Node.js and React. One thing I care about a lot is value. And value is really all there is. If you do something that has no value, then why are you doing it? And for us as engineers, it's very easy to make things that have some value because they are fun or because they make us feel like we are like great engineers, but actually it doesn't really have any value. I'd like to start with a quote I heard today. And the quote doesn't seem very deep, but I think it has a deep meaning into it. And the quote is, our front-end engineers want us to use GraphQL. This was said by Harro van der Klauw, engineer at Super. Very interesting. This really got me thinking. Let's start with an example. I want to make an app about the plans of my friends. I want to know what my friends are up to so that I can go with them and do whatever, like join them for a beer or whatever they are up to. So this is what the data is like. I have some friends that are friends of each other. Friends have plans. Friends attend the plans of other friends. And plans happen somewhere. Very good. So I want to make an API of that. OK, so I'll make a friends endpoint. I do a get there. I get the friends data. I want to know the plans of a friend, so I make a plans endpoint, and I pass the creator ID, the ID of the friend who created that plan. I get some data about it. OK, so I want to fetch the upcoming plans. I do a get on plans, fetch the creator names of all the plans. OK, I do a bunch of gets. Then I want to fetch the data of the people who are going to those plans so that I can display. In the end, I want to display a page. This is where the value is, a page with the upcoming plans, who is going there, who created them, so that I can decide if I want to go there or not. So there's a lot of fetching there. I need to fetch the location so I can display a map. Well, that's a lot of fetching. Of course, the pros of REST is that it's easy to write, but we'll see about that. And there's many tools, many libraries available for REST, but we'll see about that too. Has also quite some cons, because you're so free, you can do whatever you want. There are some limitations, but within these limitations, you have a very high degree of freedom. You have to find a way so that the client can request the data that they want. And either you allow the client to fetch too much data, or they have to fetch too little. Like before, I wanted to display a plan and who created it, and that required me to do more than one call. Documentation, well, there's some standard-like things like JSON API, etc., that help you do that, but it's not really standard. It's hard to discover for the same reasons. There's not really a generic client for REST that knows about the things that this API is exposing. There's much post-processing needed, so the client has to fetch the plans and the user data and then merge it together. There's much to decide. Do I want to make plan a sub-resource of user or not? All this comes from a mismatch between the reality, which is friends are out doing something and I want to display information about that, to the API of friends and locations and plans, etc. So, OK, we can try to fix it. OK, if the problem is that the client doesn't want to do an extra call to retrieve the data of who is going to some plan, well, I can add some embedding attribute that I will use in the backend to embed the data of the attendees. Or I can limit the fields, like if you only want the name of a friend, OK, well, then you can pass the field parameter. So that you don't have to fetch many friends. You can, I don't know, I could use some comma-separated value for the ID to retrieve many. Well, I don't know. I've done that before. I don't like it very much. I think you can get the feeling from my voice of why I don't like it. So this is what the data is like. Let's go back to the data. Friend who is a friend of some other friends. They have plans have locations. I was talking about this in terms of resources that are related to other resources by some foreign keys. But this is really a graph. So this is the graph of GraphQL, and this comes from Facebook, who are doing basically this stuff and more, the same graph with more nodes. So if we understand and observe that this is a graph and operate with it as if it was a graph and not as if it was a bunch of sets of data that we relate to each other with keys, we can get to the value in a much easier way. So this is the quote again. Front-end engineers want to use GraphQL. Why? Because they can just ask for what they want. And here there was the hilarious moment, haha, of course they want because they are lazy guys, and then they will give all the work to the backend engineers. Yeah, but it has a meaning that they can just ask for what they want. Because while you're inventing all this new language so that the front-end engineers can request the data they want, the front-end engineers are thinking about the front-end, which is what the user sees. And this is very often much more close to the real world, to the real data, than our point of view. So you're trying to decide what the client wants, inventing all these API endpoints. In the end, you're creating waste because you're deciding something that is not for you to decide. And actually, you don't know. By the time when you write this API, it's normally very early. There's nothing else. The API is what the client then will consume. So what do you know? You just started the project. This is what the user cares about. A bunch of boxes with a map and the name of the place and who is going there and who liked it. And this is how everybody sees our project. But this is very different to what we see. We see a bunch of tables with relations. Like, we're very far from the world. What we think is a good way of doing something, if we're not careful, it's not really a good way of doing something. It's a fun way. It's maybe a good way for us, but it's not a good way if what we are after is providing value. So, going back to the API, which, by the way, I was building with a friend. How about the plans? The client wants to know upcoming plans, who is going there, who created it, where will it happen. So the response that the client would like is a response where you get the plans. Of each plan, you get the name and the description. Of the creator, you get the name, maybe also the avatar. Maybe the avatar comes later. I don't know, like when the front-end engineers finally add the IMG tag, then they also want the avatar. The location, the name and coordinates of the location of the attendees, we want their names. So this is a query in GraphQL. This is exactly the query that the client would run, and this is the response. You would get the plans. You would get exactly the fields that you want. Now. So the basics of GraphQL is it's a query language. So this doesn't really work. This is just language. It's like SQL or like the language that you were inventing by putting question mark embed equals attendees. You describe your data and how to operate with it. So you say, I have plans, and you can create plans. And to create a plan, you need to give me the name and who created it, whatever. I'll show you later. The description is done using types. So you can you define what type is every field that you request, what type is the data you will return. So you can know for sure what you will get back from the API, and you can validate that the queries are correct before running them. You can define, you can document, put actual text for humans to read when they are trying to use your API, etc. And client decides what data it needs, and the server resolves the data. And we'll see about this in a moment. So, for example, how would this work, this API of mine, of friends and their plans? Well, I would define a query. For now, I'm just going to return plans. I'm not going to return anything else. Plans is a query and returns a list of plans. What is a plan? Well, it has an ID, which is an ID. It's a special type in GraphQL. It's not just a string. It's unique within the type. It has a description, a list of attendees, which is a list of friends, location. The things that have this exclamation mark, they are mandatory. What is a friend? Well, same thing. Location, you get the gist of it. How do you define a query? How do you define the way to obtain, for example, the list of plans? Well, you just say it's a query, and it's called plans, and it has these parameters. Pretty easy, no? And then when you query it, you pass the values, and so this is the query. You pass the values and also which data would you like back. So I would like the 10 plans of max day 7, whatever that means, because I didn't document it. And I want the name and the creator name, for example. So for example, if I go to here, well, here I was just asking for the friend's name. But can I ask for anything else of the friend? Well, I could go to the documentation, query, I can ask for friends, and the friend also has plan attendees, plan. Aha. It's a bit nasty, this thing, isn't it? Plan attendees. This won't work. Oh, yeah, it does work. OK. I messed something, because without me messing that, this was much nicer, the names of the fields. It was not plan attendees. It was just plans and then attendees. So don't pay attention to this. Actually, do pay attention. This is Graphene Django, which is nice, but is not really production ready at the moment. So this, by the way, is the default interface to GraphQL. Maybe it's better to disable it in production, although the guys at GitHub, they have it enabled. And this is what you can use to play with the data, inspect it by hand, look at the documentation, and all this is generated from the code. OK, we'll look at this more later. So what's good about GraphQL? That the client decides what it wants to receive. It does a single call. I want to do all this stuff. I want to create a user and return me its ID, whatever. It's self-documenting, provided that you documented yourself in the code. And you can validate the queries, and there's more that is good about it. So how does it work? What is the magic that makes this thing work? Well, the magic is in you. You have to do it. I'm sorry about that. So, OK, we want to implement it. This Python conference, and let's take a look at what tools there are for Python and Django. There is Graphene, which is GraphQL for Python. And there's also Graphene Django, so we will use that. First of all, just Graphene. I'm going to define a query. No database here, nothing, just the query is called myself. If you call it, you get I am Groot. So how does this work? Well, I define the query. This class query is this query part here. So in the class query, you define all the queries that you allow in your data. One of the queries is myself. I can ask for myself, and I get a string. Now, how do I know which string I get when I call this query? Well, there is the resolve function that decides which string you have to return. It takes some arguments, it takes some context, so you can get like the user if you're logged in, etc. I'm ignoring all that, just returning one string, and this is the result. So dictionary, this is the key. And the value is whatever the resolver returns. Very simple. But this means that here you could call a REST API if you like REST API so much, or another system or whatever. OK, let's take a look at Django. So I define a type in Graphene. Yeah, this is not Django yet. I define a type in Graphene. A plan, which has a name and maybe other things. And then I can define a query on that. And I say it no longer returns a string. It returns this time. It returns a plan with all the fields of the plan. And then in resolve plans, I would get plans from DB, however that method works. And just by doing this, if I went, or if I go to the documentation, to the GraphQL interface, then I would see the plan. I would see all the attributes that plan has, and I could do a query and retrieve whichever attributes I want, just by doing this. So Graphene takes care of all that. If we use Django, then OK, let's use Django. Let's define a model. Model for friend has a name. Location also has a name. Plan has a creator and happens in a place at a certain time. Many-to-many relationship with friend for the attendees. And Graphene Django can read all this and just expose it as it is. So I can define a GraphQL object called friend, which maps to the friend model. Same thing for location, same thing for plan. And then I have to fix something because it doesn't work. So there's an issue open for it in Graphene Django that many-to-many fields don't work properly. Well, hopefully they will fix it. Until then, you see that it's pretty easy. I just say, you know what? You don't know how to resolve attendees. I will do it for you. I know that it's a list of friends. Ignore this decorator for now. It's just so I don't have to type all the parameters of this function. And to resolve the attendees, don't do any funny stuff. Just do a query on the attendees. So very well. This is how to expose data. Oh, by the way, here I'm just exposing everything. You can limit which fields you want to expose, etc. You can also do authentication. I will cover it very lightly later. How about modifying data? Well, there's another type. There's not just queries, there's also mutations. So whatever has a side effect, although what doesn't, but you get what I mean. That's a mutation. So you define, of a mutation, you define what input it has and what it returns. So it's very common to return OK as a Boolean to say if it worked or not, the mutation. The input, well, these are the input fields of create plan. I want to create a plan, so I need a name, a description, who created it. Of course, this who created it, probably you don't want to expose it here, but you want to get it from the context. So see which user is logged in and use that user. But well, for this example, I just put it here as a field. So I expose it here, and if we go to the GraphQL, if it works, I go to the mutations, create plan, and I didn't see how to add this description. There must be a way, but there's no documentation for this in Graphene. But you see here, indeed, the description of the fields. If you don't describe it, it will just say that it's self-evident. So. And the magic happens in the mutate method, where, well, you get your arguments and you do whatever needs to be done in Django to create this data. So here I just fetch the creator friend and save the plan model. Nothing fancy. So as you can see, I'm doing just the bare minimum to create a plan, just store the data. And I'm doing the very minimum in Graphene to just expose the fact that you can create a plan. And for that, oh, here it is actually. And with that, you get the whole GraphQL working for you. So how does this look like in the client side? So this is from an app I'm building. Basically, you can work on items. It's a very simple React.js app. But I just want to show you how it looks like in the client side. So I'm using something called Apollo, which is a very easy way to interface with GraphQL. Basically, in a file, I define the queries. I want to fetch the items. And that means to do a query and of the items, give me the ID and the name. And I also want to create an item, which I will pass a name and a duration. And this, what will it do? Well, it will launch a mutation, create item, passing the name and the duration, and I will get the ID back. So I can put it in, I can fetch it and display it and all this stuff. And then in my component, when I want to display the list of items, well, this is just standard React. There's no magic here. I just display, for each item in my props, I display an item component. And I have also a button of refresh. And what this will do is refresh data from the database. So I get all these props magically from, well, fetch items. This is the name of the query, by the way. I just get this data from the props. This is put there by Apollo. So the way this works is I define my component, just assuming I will have some data in the props that I want to display. I create another component, which just extends this one using GraphQL. So I say, use the fetch items query together with this component that I define here, and this is how you will display data. how do you modify data? Well, same thing. I defined here the mutation on how to create an item. Well, the same thing. I extend my component with mutation on how to create an item. And then when the submit button is pressed, then, well, I will call mutate, which comes from the props. I removed the line. I will pass whatever variables. This also comes from the props. This line is missing here. So this name and duration are actually variables in this function. And I tell it that it has to refetch the query of the list of items. So this client is smart enough that if I modify an object, it knows that the data has to be refetched. But if I modify an object, it doesn't know that the list of objects has to be refetched. Or if I create an object, it doesn't need the list has to be refetched. So that's why this thing is here. But the cool thing about this is that even though I have to tell it that it has to refetch the list of items whenever I create an item, it knows quite a lot of things. And it will be smart in fetching the data. It will cache things in the client side, etc. So client has understanding of the data. It does some smart fetching. It knows when to refetch, but sometimes you need some help. But how about fetching, when you have to fetch many related entities? And this is a question I was expecting. OK, you want to display the plans, and for each plan, who created it? So that means you will fetch all the plans, and then for each plan, when it's time to resolve the creator, you will do a query, select star from friends, where ID equals whatever ID is in the creator ID of the plan, and that for every single plan. So there's a lot of IDs being fetched. Well, Graphene does some batching, so it will do where ID in, and it will pass the list of IDs. You can overwrite all these things. If you want to do the join yourself, you can. In Node.js, they use data loader, which is kind of similar way to do the same. So you won't have tons of queries. How about authentication, rate limiting, or depth limiting, so that you don't fetch from the plans the users and from the users the plans, etc.? Well, there is middleware that you can use for that. You can look at the query and decide, well, I stop here, or I don't even process this query. It's too deep. And for the authentication, the same. In the end, if you use Django authentication, you can get the user and filter based on that. Or whatever, or do a token-based authentication, and check for it in the middleware and add that filter. How about pagination? Well, often people use limit and offset, or they expose a cursor. That's the way Relay likes it. Relay is like the thing I showed you, but a bit more complicated. It wants data in a certain way, and then it really likes it, but it needs to be in a certain way. So if you're getting started, I suggest Apollo and checking Relay a bit later. So we are end of the talk. If you were dozing, GraphQL makes it very easy to expose data. Because you're closer to the data, there is less waste. You do less work that you didn't have to do. You just let the client decide whatever it wants. It's easy to get started. There's good documentation in GraphQL. Graphene, not so much. This low is Apollo, which got cut. Relay. It's easy to allow your clients to kill your server. If you just, since they can request whatever they want, well, they can request whatever they want. So you have to deal with that. And it's worth learning. It's fun. So thank you very much. This, by the way, is the GraphQL interface of GitHub. You can play with it to see like how a big organization does it. They use, so play with it.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? You've got a few minutes. There's one here, of course, in the back.
Hi, if I understand it correctly, can I use this as replacement, for example, a replacement for Django REST framework?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Loud and clear, I'd say.
I would like to ask, how would you compare it to Django REST framework? I've seen some of the abilities it has, but to your experience, how does it compare to Django REST framework?
Well, my experience with Django REST framework is a bit old. like shortly after it started. Actually, I tried to help the guy that was starting to write it back in Poland in some hackathon. So it's very old. Probably now it's much easier. But when I started, it felt there was a lot of work to be done to get something running, whereas here it's very easy. Maybe it's easier now. I haven't played with it in a very long time. But then you have a REST API. It's cool if that's what you want. But in my experience, if you just want to get something out the door as quickly as possible, this is a much better way to do it. Because you just expose this, the data I have, the client will figure out what it wants to retrieve, how it wants to interact with it, put it in the hands of the people, and see what actually has to happen. Because until then, you don't really know.
You said it's easy to allow your client to kill the server. Is it also easy to not allow them to do that?
Yeah, so in Django or Python, you would use a middleware to basically, you can count how deep in the query you're going, and then you can stop at some point. This is how the Graphene guys recommend you do it. In Node.js, you do something similar. Not the best answer I'd like to give you. I'd like to give a more satisfying answer. But I think this is enough for most cases.
Okay, yes.
So you said it's not production ready. When is it production ready?
Well, GraphQL as a language is. GitHub is using it, although for testing, Facebook is using it. Travelbird just switched to it in many of their APIs. Graphene, I get the impression that Graphene is quite production ready. Graphene Django, I don't think it is, because it still has quite some rough edges. I get the feeling that nowadays, for these kind of tools, you get better quality software for modern things in Node.js, so it might be worth to look into that.
More questions? No, of course. Blijf lopen.
Moet je aan deze kant blijven. Is it possible to optimize your queries in Graphene, like the select related?
Like select, you don't want to select.
Like if somebody builds a query that goes quite deep.
Yeah.
Normally Django needs some help that you prefetch or select related objects.
Yeah. So you can define your own resolver. So by default, Graphene Django will just provide resolvers for you. But you can define your own, and that's where you would just say, no, here I step in, and if you want this kind of data, this is how we will do it.
Okay, final question then.
I just wanted to make a photo of the slide with the guy from Super.
I think it was slide 3. Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Are you front-end engineer?
With that, Joko and I'd like to thank, please give him a warm welcome and warm hand, Mr. Oscar.
Cool.
Thank you very much.